We're just going to take a look at the physical barriers and the non-specific defenses of the immune system. So we'll start with the first non-specific defenses. These are your physical barriers, and these are the skin and mucous membranes. So remember, this is your first line of defense. They're really good at keeping out most pathogens. So we also have, associated with the skin and mucous membranes, we have mechanical defenses, which will physically remove pathogens from the body. So think about like coughing, sneezing, vomiting, diarrhea, tears. Those are all things that are mechanical defenses that can flush things from the body. So let's take a look at the skin first. It's a very strong barrier to preventing microorganisms from getting in, and that's because the skin cells have a protein called keratin that's actually waterproof. So it's pretty good at keeping a lot of things out. And then also the skin is not a very nice place for microorganisms to grow because it's like a desert. It's dry, it's salty from your sweat. It's also a little bit acidic because of the oils on your skin, and also the skin cells keep shedding every day. So if you have a microorganism attached there, the skin cell just falls off and then the microorganism is gone. And then we also have our normal microbiota or normal flora. So remember all of the Staph aureus, and there's some other bacteria living on our skin. Remember, that's an example of commensalism. And remember, commensalism is when the one organism benefits, like the Staph aureus, and the other organism, like us, is not harmed. And remember that the normal microbiota will crowd out any invaders and keep them from establishing an infection there. The mucous membranes are also pretty good at keeping things out. So remember, mucous membranes will be found at any of the openings of the body. So it's the GI tract, respiratory tract, genitourinary tracts. That's where you're going to find your mucous membranes. They're called mucous membranes because they contain cells that produce mucus, and that sticky mucus will trap microorganisms there and then can get flushed away. And then also the mucous membranes secrete some antimicrobial secretions. So they can secrete an enzyme called lysozyme, which, remember, that actually will break apart the peptidoglycan cell wall. So that's a pretty important defense as well. Okay, and in your eyes, there are things that can get in through your eyes. But we have a lot of defenses here. You have your tears that are produced that will flush the eye. And there's also mucus that is part of the tear secretion, so that will trap things too. We do produce lysozymes, that enzyme that breaks down the cell wall of bacteria. And there's also some antibodies that are shed into the tears. They're called IgA antibodies, which we're going to learn more about in the next chapter. But they're there to bind the pathogens and prevent them from binding to our cells and getting inside our body. The respiratory system has a lot of defenses as well. So if you look on this diagram here, if you've taken anatomy, you've learned about the nasal conchae. So there's some scrolls of bone that create these little narrow passageways. And as the air goes through there, it creates some turbulence and kind of shakes the air. And then a lot of the microorganisms will drop out and get trapped in the mucus and the nose hair. And then you can either sneeze them out, or the mucus will drain to the back of your throat, and then you can swallow that and get rid of it. And obviously, your respiratory system, you do produce mucus, which will trap the microorganisms, and you have this mucociliary escalator, which we'll take a look at on the next slide. And then sneezing and coughing will get rid of microorganisms out of the respiratory system. And then if pathogens get way down into the lungs, into the air sacs, the alveoli, there's a type of white blood cell there called a macrophage. And they're phagocytic, meaning they will go around and eat all kinds of stuff. So if you had stuff that get way down into the lungs, those macrophages living inside the alveoli will eat those. And then this is just a picture of the mucociliary escalator that is in our airways. So the airways are lined with cilia, and there are cells there that produce mucus. And the air that you breathe in, if there's any bacteria or viruses that you breathe in, they will get trapped in the mucus, and then the cilia will move the mucus and the trapped microorganisms up to the back of your throat, where you either cough those out or swallow them, and that will get rid of them from the respiratory tract. The GI tract has a lot of protections as well. You do not have to memorize this list, just be familiar with them. So the saliva has lysozymes in it. So remember, that's the enzyme that will break down the cell wall of bacteria. And then if you swallow pathogens, a lot of them cannot survive the very acidic environment of the stomach. So the stomach has a pH of 2. And then peristalsis, as we do those rhythmic contractions and move things through the GI tract, we can eventually defecate the pathogens, or we could vomit them up as well. So that would also get rid of them. The lining of the GI tract, the epithelial cells, they also shed every day. So if you have any microorganisms attached to them, then you just shed that cell and then they're gone as well. We also secrete IgA antibodies in the saliva and the intestines, and those antibodies are there to bind to pathogens and prevent them from binding to our cells and getting inside. And then remember, the GI tract has billions of bacteria that are living there, normal microbiota or normal flora, and they help prevent us from getting infections in the GI tract because they take up all the living space, crowd out any pathogens, and they also might produce some antibiotics to kill off any of the invaders. And then the genitourinary tract, also not a great place for microorganisms to grow. Remember that the urine has a lot of toxic waste products that are going to be in it that we're getting rid of, so that will kill off a lot of microorganisms. The pH of the urine is a little bit acidic, so that's not very favorable either. And if you did have some bacteria get into the kidneys, the renal medulla of the kidney is very hypertonic. There's a lot of solutes there. And remember, hypertonic solutions will suck the water out of the bacteria and they shrivel up, and that causes plasmolysis, and that will kill the bacteria. And then probably the biggest defense of the genitourinary tract is that when you urinate, you will flush microbes out when you do that. We do tend to see more urinary tract infections or UTIs in women than in men, and that's just because of the anatomy. So women have a much shorter urethra than men, so it's much easier for the bacteria to crawl up the urethra and get into the bladder in women than in men. And lastly, the normal microbiota or flora, all the microorganisms that are normally living on us or inside of us, they protect us as well. So remember that they take up all the space, all the food, and so it's very hard for pathogens to get established. And also they might kill off some of the invaders by producing some antibiotics. And then remember the microbiome, just that definition is just talking about all the genes of all the microorganisms that normally live on us or inside of us.